The milk prices are exciting right now.
The milk Pat O'Brien's cows are producing has never been more valuable.
I've been farming for 40 years, and I've never seen milk prices this high. It's about time.
O'Brien's Stoner Prairie Dairy is milking 210 cows, and they hope to be at 250 by the fall to take advantage of the high prices.
Well, this is a boom time, definitely.
Farmers are experiencing some very nice margins.
Professor Robert Kropp has been studying dairy prices for the University of Wisconsin since 1966.
Well, we're at record milk prices and substantially higher than we had a year ago.
As is usually the case in farming, the weather has a lot to do with it.
Right now, California has the worst drought in 130 years, and Nevada and some of those areas are very dry. Texas has suffered from that.
Severe droughts in the Southwest the last 2 years and rising beef prices have led to some farmers sending their dairy cows to the meat market.
Farmers sell a dairy cow for hamburger at a pretty good price.
Pat O'Brien says a wet spring in Wisconsin last year made for poor forage, which means lower milk production.
Our milk production isn't quite as good as it has been in the past.
But it's not just the weather in Wisconsin or even the United States that matters.
We're impacted a heck of a lot more whether it rains in New Zealand or doesn't rain in New Zealand.
Kropp says the biggest driver in dairy prices is world demand. And if exporting countries like New Zealand see a decline in production, demand for U.S. dairy rises.
Relatively small changes have big changes in prices.
The United States exported 15.5% of all milk production last year, valued at $6.7 billion.
Record exports last year continued through January, exports way above a year ago. Butter exports up 115%, cheese 46%.
Pat O'Brien remembers when all that mattered was the weather in your own backyard, not on the other side of the world.
We didn't think about the impact of the weather on farmers in California or whether New Zealand had a good crop.
And it takes a confluence of events from around the world.
If anyone knows about the world market for dairy products, it's the cheesemakers.
This came from Austria for the contest.
John Umhafer is the executive director of the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association. Cheesemakers from around the state are in this warehouse unpacking entries for the World Championship Cheese Contest.
This is the ugly work before the pretty show.
90% of all milk in Wisconsin goes into cheese production, so these men feel the effect of rising prices.
You start to put all that together with really high demand, and the milk prices and cheese prices are soaring.
They're paying, $23 for milk going into cheese, which is, $6 higher than they had to pay a year ago.
Well, when you get a high price like that, it is partially absorbed along the way, and the consumer also sees a higher price.
I think the farmers and the cheesemakers both are going to see some pretty good months ahead.
There we go. Brian Zimmerman is a cheesemaker and says his profits are tied to the price of a 40-pound block of cheese.
So as the 40-pound block price increases, our profits increase.
Welcome to the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association World Contest.
While rising prices likely won't impact the sale of high-end cheese like that found at the World Championship, Umhafer says cheesemakers are worried high costs could eventually be too much for consumers.
There's always a range that's good, and if you hit the top of that range, you start to get the consumer saying, I can't afford that. The cheesemaker would love to see a price settle in a little lower so the consumer's happy, the farmer's happy, he's happy. We don't need record prices.
Bob Kropp isn't seeing it.
We've seen in the past when cheese got over $2 a pound, we saw some resistance on the demand side. We're not seeing that.
Pat O'Brien is also concerned the high prices could drop off.
I'm a little concerned that we may overproduce and there'll become a huge supply and we're going to lose this.
In the past, a jump in prices led farmers to increase their herd size. But Kropp thinks this graph of milk prices in recent years will make farmers more cautious.
They know they're not going to stay at record levels forever. They know feed prices go back up again, and so there may be more cautious in expansion, recognizing there is more uncertainty.
We have no intentions of expanding. We're just going to kind of get caught up.
Pat O'Brien says he'll use extra income on repairs that were put off during the hard times, like new barn doors.
The milk prices in 2009 were devastating. And I think there's a lot of farmers, probably a little bit including ourselves, are still recovering from that time.
Meanwhile, farmers and cheesemakers want you to know their profit is your gain as well.
You make hay while the sun shines. And when the cheesemakers are doing good and the farmers are doing good, the local economy is doing great.
We go downtown, we spend our money at the implement dealer, we spend our money at the car dealership.
Crop says the good times will continue, at least through the end of the year.
Prices will be lower the second half of the year, but we're not looking for real sharp declines.
For Market to Market, I'm Zach Schultz.